The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Yeah, a couple days in the 40s, late November, and okay, it's getting to be winter time. The weather people on TV are geeking out about all the snow we're supposed to have this winter, so you figure, okay, we're heading into winter. Buckle up. I'm looking at the long-range forecast. It's supposed to be 60 on Saturday, upper 50s on Sunday, which is good because I'm going to the game, going to the Commanders and Dolphins game. And I don't know. It doesn't officially start winter until the 21st, I believe, 21st, 22nd of December, so we're still a few weeks out. But all the panic about the snow, and, I may be eating my words here in January, but just seems like there's a possibility they could be wrong. These people don't like to be wrong, by the way. What they do is they forecast, and then, like at 11 o'clock at night, when the forecast changes, they'll say, oh, no snow. And then the next day, they trumpet, hey, we were the first to tell you, no snow. So who knows? But you didn't come here for weather. You came here to listen to me yak about sports, if that's what you're interested in. And there are a number of things to get to today, some juicy things like David Tepper has quickly taken the torch from Dan Snyder. Now, there's nothing away from the business, no allegations of sexual harassment or anything like that. But the way he's running his business, and at least he gets up there and talks about it, the way he defends how he does business is absolutely head-shaking. We will get to that. Dean Blandino was on yesterday with Rich Eisen, and this ties into a column that Mike Freeman wrote in USA Today saying, yes, we all know the officiating stinks. The fans complain about it. The players complain about it. The coaches complain about it. The owners complain about it, but nothing changes. And the reason that nothing changes is we keep watching it. And I don't have the exact number in front of me, but the rating for the Commanders' debacle on Thanksgiving Day against Dallas was tremendous. It's like the third most watched regular season game ever. And I think it may be right in line with what they had last year for the Giants. And Giants are pretty good. I mean, they made the playoffs last year, and that was a really big game. This was, I guess, a big game for Dallas in that they need to keep winning to have a chance of catching Philadelphia for the division title. But 41 million people watching it, and he's right. I mean, we don't turn off the TV, even though the officiating isn't good, and he even makes a case for maybe the NFL wants this because we spend a lot of time away from the games kvetching about the officiating. So maybe he's right on that, but we'll get to what Dean Blandino says about officiating. He's the guru of that, and he says he's actually going to be working with the USFL and the XFL, which are merging this year to maybe get some better officiating trained and get some better officials out there on the field. And also in the next hour, we'll take a further look at what Alex Smith said in the follow-up to what Tom Brady said, both of them on ESPN. Alex Smith, an ESPN employee, Brady a guest with Stephen A. Smith, where Brady says it's a mediocre product in the NFL now, and Alex Smith says, whoa, hold on, Tom, you played just last year. You won your Super Bowl in this era of mediocrity. Let's not get carried away here with how bad the product is, and he makes the case it actually may be better than it's been in a while. So we'll get to those comments and more coming up. And also, it was 6 years ago today that Matt Lauer was fired by the Today Show. This was a stunner. This was part of the Me Too movement getting off the ground, and hopefully we've come a long way since then. But we also had in 2020, the start of the Dan Snyder ouster with allegations of what happened, and he was later fined $60 million for having a toxic culture, and an investigation by the league found that he had, in fact, been sexually harassing an employee, a female employee. So that's kind of interesting to look back 6 years ago where we were and where we are now. We'll get to that in the next hour. All right, let's start with David Tepper here. And Tepper yesterday held a news conference a day after he stunned everybody, 2 days after. No, day after. Today's Wednesday, so this was Monday. Monday, he stunned everybody and said Frank Reich was out. The team 1-10. It's the earliest firing of a coach in a first year since George Allen was fired by the Rams in 1978 after only 2 exhibition games. That's a record which will never be touched. But this is the earliest in a season that a first-year coach got the boot after only 11 games. And Tepper is impetuous. I mean, he's owned the team for 5.5 years. He fired Ron Rivera in his second year as owner, fired him about this time of year, around Thanksgiving. He fired Matt Rule last year during the season, and now he fires Frank Reich. He's had interim coaches Perry Fewell, Steve Wilkes, who, by the way, did a good job, and now it goes to Chris Tabor to be the coach for the rest of the year. Quarterbacks coach Josh McCown and running backs assistant head coach Deuce Staley also fired fired Monday in this little Tepper tantrum that he had. This was part of the news conference yesterday where Tepper, to his credit, I'll give him credit for this, he did stand up in front of reporters, which you would rarely see Dan Snyder do. He did actually answer the questions that were asked.
Dave, you guys are 30-63 since you became owner. I think it's the second worst mark in the NFL, one of the worst marks in pro sports. You're about to hire your 4th head coach. Do you need to reevaluate the way you do things in terms of, A, maybe using a search firm in this hiring process, but also in how you manage day-to-day operations here?
Look, things are constantly evolving, and they'll continue to evolve. And, trying to make things better is what you always try to do. Obviously, that record's not good enough. There's no hiding it. It is what it is, like everything in this sport. Everything's left on the field. Everybody knows what is every week. That record's that record. And like I said, it's not good enough. We're going to self-reflect and make it better.
Now you can decide for yourself whether he answered it or not. He probably danced around it. This was the best part. This is the takeaway soundbite. He talked for about 15 minutes yesterday. This was the big takeaway where he goes out of his way to tell everybody how patient he is. Before he answers this question, he says, look at my other businesses. I got people been with me for 20 years. I'm the most patient guy in my other business. In this business, well, the record speaks for itself. He's now looking for a 4th coach in less than 6 years of ownership. This is Tepper again with more questions at his news conference.
When Matt was hired, you preached patience and it was kind of a year-over-year evaluation. Frank gets fired 11 weeks in. To what extent was that due to maybe a philosophical shift in how you view timelines for a rebuild or turnaround?
Look, as I said, there are reasons for each individual situation. I think you guys, upon your own reflection into looking what happened through the season, can understand that. You're around town, for those that are around town, and can know the reasons. Again, I'm not going to get into those particulars, but I do have patience. I'm just not. My reputation away from this game is one for extreme patience. There's no reason why that doesn't, come here too. It does. Now, that patience comes with good performance and things that you want to see progress being made on different aspects. And as I said, I would like to have somebody here for 20, 30 years. I'd like to have somebody that would say eulogy at my funeral in 30 years. Okay, maybe it's 40 years, I hope. But that's what I'd like to have.
I've heard that kind of thing before. I'm in my 46th year of radio. And over the years, I've had bosses who have said similar things. Let's grow old together. We want to go to each other's kids' weddings. Yeah, sure. And, he's in the hedge fund business. I guess there's, a demand for instant performance there. It just doesn't work that way in the NFL. And the most ironic thing I think about Tepper is he was a part owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers. You know how many coaches the Pittsburgh Steelers have had since 1969? A period of now, 54 years? 3 coaches. They just fired the offensive coordinator, Matt Canada, last week. It's the first time that they'd made any in-season change since 1941 when Bert Bell, as part owner of the team, stepped away. That's it. That is the picture of stability. He comes from the Steelers, who, by the way, have won more than their share of Super Bowls, right? Haven't they won 5? and Tepper comes to Carolina. Now, a lot of guys who are minority partners look at how things are run and say, I wouldn't run it that way. I'd have dumped Tomlin the first time he didn't make the playoffs. Maybe that's what he was thinking. But, again, his record speaks for itself, and they stink. They're 1-10. They're 1-10, and he is now looking for his 4th coach. And, by the way, entering Dan Snyder territory now that coaches are realizing, this is not a wagon I want to hitch myself to. Yeah, he may pay me a lot of money, and in the case of Frank Reich, you're walking away with a big boatload of cash. He's going to be paid like $35 million not to coach for the next 3 years if he chooses to do that. And even if he takes another job, it only offsets some of the money. He'll still make the same money. So it's unfathomable. That's a nice word, nice college word there. That having watched what he watched in Pittsburgh, also watching the downfall of Dan Snyder. I mean, Snyder, along with the egregious stuff he did behind the scenes with his employees, that's disgusting. But the way he ran his team was similar. I mean, he didn't quite fire as early as Tepper has. He's made 2 in-season fires during his tenure, and the first one he fired during the season was Norv Turner, who he inherited. But you'd think he'd learn from that. But, guys like that, they think they're the smartest guy in the room, and they've gotten to be very rich doing it that way, so nobody's going to tell them how to do things. Scott Fowler has covered the Panthers since they arrived in the 90s. He's with the Charlotte Observer. He's the venerable longtime columnist. He was at the news conference yesterday, and he said Tepper was only calling on people who he wanted to. It wasn't like you could shout out a question. He would just point to people who had their hand up. He had his hand up the whole time, and Tepper didn't go to him, and he knows why, because he's been critical of what Tepper has done. So anyway, after the news conference, Fowler showed up on the Dan Patrick Show, asked this question.
Are they the second coming of Washington?
Well, I'll say this for Dave Tepper. He doesn't have the Dan Snyder's, off
baggage.
off the field baggage.
Yeah,
exactly. No, I mean, I will give Tepper credit for, he's changed the stadium around, the dynamics of Charlotte. There's all kind of concerts, and there are a lot of, he's great in charity. There hasn't been the off the field baggage, but in terms of results and the spinning carousel of coaches, et cetera, it feels a little like that.
But okay, he grew up a Steeler fan, correct?
Right. And was a minority owner there.
Okay,
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you model your franchise after the Steelers? Patience. Get the
I don't
right
know.
guy. They've had, 3 coaches in the last 50 years?
Right. Yeah. Tomlin still never he's still looking for his Mike Tomlin. I mean, he keeps, he references the Steelers sometimes, but it sort of is a hollow reference at these times because you've seen this over and over. He also owns the Major League Soccer team here, Dan, and has fired 2 coaches and 2 years there. But he is a patient man.
Patient man. I'd hate to see if he wasn't patient, Scott. I hope you get to ask. What was your question that you were going to ask him?
He was talking a lot about self-reflection. So I was going to ask him, let's self-reflect just for a minute. You fired the last 3 coaches you fired them all in mid-season. And I just wonder if you ever look in a mirror and think, is it me? Am I the problem?
I think he did a really wise thing of not calling on you, Scott.
Maybe so. You might be right.
And clearly he is the problem. He could stand up there all he wants, Tepper, and say, I'm patient in my other businesses, and every individual situation is different, and he wasn't performing. Yeah, he wasn't performing, but he had 11 games. Look, if the same philosophy was used with Chuck Noll, he would have lasted 1 year. Chuck Noll's first year was 1969. They went 1-13. And he took a quarterback named Terry Bradshaw in the first round. And things got better a little bit with Bradshaw, but it took time. It was not instant. And Bryce Young was the number one pick of the draft, just like Bradshaw in 1970. This year, it was Bryce Young, and it's slow to develop. But it's, you want to look back and say, well, we had a quarterback coach here, a guy who knows how to develop quarterbacks, and Frank Reich, and we'd let him go. And we've ruined Bryce Young because we've brought in all these different guys in the years that followed. I mean, it's just madness. Now, and speaking of madness, and why not? Because it happened last year. Why couldn't it happen again? Greg Olson, who's the lead analyst for Fox on the NFL, has reportedly let it be known that he'd like to be approached for the job. And you'd say, come on, really? Well, you don't anymore, because this is what happened last year in Indianapolis when somebody named Frank Reich got fired so that they could bring in Jeff Saturday, who's now back on television after leaving television to take over the job. And yesterday appeared with Tony and Mike on PTI and gave them his view of what Olson might be up against if, in fact, this actually unfolds, that Tepper makes the move and brings in Greg Olson to coach his team.
I left TV knowing I was going back to TV. So I don't know if that's Greg's point, right? Like, I was pretty sure. Like, once I got into it, I dabbled in it, but I will tell you, it is a complete lifestyle change, and you better be ready for that, right? And so if Greg Olson, as far as figuring that part of his life out, if he's comfortable with that, the other part I would say is, and the more important part, is finding the right staff. When you haven't been in the coaching business very long, finding those guys, because it's not just going to be, is it the scheme you want? It's personality-wise as well. Do you mesh? Do you fit? Do you work well together? Because here's the deal. You're going to be spending about 18 hours a day together. So you better be able to get along. You better be in alignment of what you think principally we have to get done in this offense or in this defense. And the other part of the head coach is the amount of things outside or, quote, off the field that you have to deal with. This is not just listen, the greatest part of when I was coaching with the Colts was those 2 hours on the field. But, man, the other points, you got a lot of ask that you have to step into that have nothing to do with the game. And it really – so you don't get nearly as much of the, quote, coaching as you would expect to do. But, listen, I wish him the best. I hope – I love, the Dan Campbells. I love the Antonio Pierce. I love when former guys are getting head jobs. So if he can get it, more power to him. Boy, I'll support him with the best of them.
Well, different situation than what you're discussing there. Antonio Pierce had been an assistant coach on a variety of teams. Dan Campbell, also an assistant coach. You don't just step out of the booth, as Saturday proved. It's almost impossible to do, though he did win a game against the Raiders. I think it was the first game he coached. But it just doesn't work. And as far as his point about hiring a staff, who with any kind of experience is going to go to work for Greg Olson? Maybe there's some older coach who says, okay, I'll have a lot of autonomy there. I can show him the ropes. I don't have anybody breathing down my neck, maybe. But you're not going to be able to assemble a staff if you've never coached above Pop Warner. It's the lunacy of the league is really, sometimes you have to step back and say, really? Is this how they do business? This is a $25 billion a year business, and this is how it's done? I mean, insane, right? Crazy. Coming up, we'll get to officiating. Mike Freeman, USA Today, takes a look at how bad the officiating is and why we tolerate it. We'll get to that, plus what Dean Blandino, who is, I guess, the officiating guru, used to be the head of officiating, now is on Fox and analyzes what the officials have done or haven't done on particular calls. He was on the Rich Eisen yesterday outlining just what the problems are with officiating in the NFL. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
All right, we got Tony on a chilly Wednesday today. He's coming up at 11 o'clock, and in the next hour, we'll look at what Alex Smith said about the Tom Brady comments. Got quarterback versus quarterback, and some interesting views on this. Some of them from Chase Daniel, who does a podcast now. Chase Daniel has won the economic game in the NFL. He stuck around for 15 years and made something like $40 million and won only 2 games. Like, never played. but made a lot of money and observed a lot about quarterbacks, and now he does a podcast, so he's got some interesting thoughts on the back and forth between the two of them. Meantime, Mike Freeman, USA Today, used to be with the Post, played college football at Delaware, knows the game, writes kind of a tongue-in-cheek column about the officiating in the NFL, but we do it every year. We complain and complain and complain. How can they do this? And there's conspiracies about games being fixed and all the things that go along with it. And he writes, is it possible to quantify how bad the officials are this year as opposed to previous ones? It's less than an exact science and more of what our eyes tell us, but blown calls, as in years past, are everywhere. Complaints about them are everywhere. Owners, coaches, fans, media all hate officiating. It's been that way for decades and probably will be that for years to come. Do you know why? Because you tolerate it. All of you watch the NFL. And again, the rating for a 45-10 debacle of a game on Thanksgiving was like 41 million people watch the Cowboys stomp all over Washington. So you're watching it even when the football is bad and the officiating is bad. You're watching it. Freeman says if you had higher football standards, this problem would disappear. Well, none of us are going to stop watching football if we like it, right? We're not going to have a protest. Oh, the officiating is bad, therefore we won't watch football on Sunday or Thanksgiving or whenever else it's on, Monday night, Thursday night. No, it doesn't work that way. But he says, Freeman says, if your iPhone malfunctioned on a weekly basis and Apple took little meaningful action to fix it, you'd buy a Samsung. If your car broke down constantly, the way an NFL official does when making the wrong call, you'd get a new car. He says fans could change all of this by refusing to watch games unless the NFL took more drastic steps to fix the issue, like going to full-time officiating or making the entire process more transparent and less sacrosanct. The league could have officials stand at a podium and take questions after a game following a bad call the same way coaches and players do instead of using a pool reporter. Well, they're not going to do that. And make no mistake, Freeman writes, the NFL, at least in part, loves the fact that officiating generates massive amounts of controversy and even hatred. No one from the league office is going to say that on the record, but I promise you, absolutely promise you, this is true. There's also the fact that officiating inconsistencies feed the gambling universe. Gambling, in part, relies on volatility and risk, and if the game is more chaotic because of the refs, it intensifies the impacts of gambling, both good and bad. And again, here are the TV numbers. Last year, the NFL accounted for 82 of the 100 most watched American shows. That number was 75 out of 100 the year before. So it went up. It went from 75 to 82 of the 100 most watched shows. So everybody's getting fat off of this. The NFL is raking in the television dollars, and the television networks just want more NFL product because, look, when you put it on the air, people watch it. And on top of that, Mike doesn't even mention this in the column, advertisers want to be on board with live sports. Why? Because viewers watch the commercials. If you put a show on network television, which they don't really do anymore, but shows like ER, people DVR them and they zip through the commercials. In sports, you may not watch all of it. You may go to the bathroom, you may make a sandwich, you may hit the remote during a commercial, but you got to be back because you don't know whether you're going to miss a 60-yard punt return as soon as they come back from break. So people are more likely to watch the commercial. So it's it's not much you can do about this. People would tell you, hey, if you don't like the officiating, stop watching the games. We're not going to do that. Dean Blandino is the guru of officiating, used to be the head of officiating, now an analyst for Fox on officiating. He was on with Rich Eisen yesterday addressing this issue about fans being fed up with officiating.
I don't know if it's never been worse. I've heard this before. I've been involved in NFL officiating since 95, okay. and we've heard this before. It's worse than it's ever been. It's terrible. It's this, it's that. I think the scrutiny is greater. I think the technology, I think the access that we have, the angles, the technology,
the 4K everything, of it all too.
All of it. And I think there's a disconnect between when you watch a play at full speed on the field from one perspective, and then you take that play and now we're going to analyze it from 4 different angles and super slow motion. There's a disconnect, right? The officials only get that one look. I do feel like we are getting we're getting worse on the field because we're relying too much on replay and we're relying too much on technology to help us. And I think we're getting away from the on-field officials and getting them to a point where we don't have to go to replay. We can get it right initially.
Really? So what the point of that is what? That the officials are not focused as they don't need to be as focused in the moment because they know there's a backstop?
I think they're focused, but I think they're relying too much on replay. They have their wireless communication. They have somebody in their ear. They're not being as decisive, and they're wanting help from upstairs or getting help from upstairs. And they're not. I think I've said this before, and I look at it this way, right? Think of the newer cars today. The newer cars today have all the bells and whistles, right? You back up, it beeps. You got the rear view mirror. You got the camera, all that stuff. Drive a car from 1995. Try to pull out of your driveway. Like it's right. We're worse drivers today because we have all this technology helping us, and that's what I think is happening with the officials to some extent. Is we're relying so much. How many plays have you seen where it's a clear incomplete pass, but they don't make a decision and they let it go, right? And then we come back and we have to put it back and reset the clock. So I think we're relying a little bit too much on replay. I think replay is great. I think we need to add it in some instances. I think we need to work on the officials and getting them back to basics.
Before we get to that, but what about plays that have nothing to do with replay? For instance, how is Josh Allen not being taken down by the back of his jersey and the front of his jersey that is ripped as the son of Ed is staring right at it, man? I mean, and that's so damaging when that happens. Like, he's looking right at it. And those types of plays, Justin Herbert getting hit just as he's going out of bounds or just as he's gone out of bounds. No flag there, but let's flag the offensive lineman that's clearly inflamed by the moment.
Sure,
let's not just let it all play out. Let's just be a robot about it. That sort of stuff. And the conversation I hear out of that is that if there were more year-round reps and conversations, if these folks were full-time employees instead of letting them be moonlighters, then that stuff would be cleaned up. How do you answer that?
I think the idea of full-time officials, it's a term we like to throw around. I think they are as full-time as anyone can be in season, right? I think they are they watch a ton of film. They work hours upon hours upon hours.
Like what? Let's give people an idea
you're going
of this.
So you're going to work your game, right? You get in the day before. You're going to go through an entire pregame the day before on Saturday. 4 or 5 hours, then you're going to work the game.
Like, what's the pregame though? Like, the players.
You're going through, and that's the preparation during the week. They are scouting the two teams. If we've got the Eagles and 49ers playing on Sunday,
yes, sir.
Okay, that crew is going to look at the last couple of weeks. They're going to look at if those two teams. They'll go back to the playoff game. They'll look at all of those things. Look for trends, just like the teams are scouting their opponents.
Spend time looking at film.
Spend time looking at film, looking at tendencies.
As a group or individually?
Individually during the week because they all live in different places.
Yes, sir.
And I think can we get together now with Zoom, the virtual world? We can do that. They have conference calls. They'll go through. And then on Saturday, they'll go through. Okay, we're going to go through, right? The Eagles, obviously, short yardage. This is the brotherly shove. Here's how we're going to officiate. Here's what they do. All of these different things. So that's what goes into a week of preparation. They get the evaluation of their previous game from the league office. They're going through that, mistakes they made, things they need to work on, mechanics, positioning, communication, all of that. So they're spending 30, 40 hours a week looking at that stuff. And it used to be you had a full-time job and you officiated. Now, when you get to this level at the NFL, you're a full-time official and you have a job on the side, or you don't even have a job on the side. I think where they could get better in the offseason, getting officials together more, getting them to OTAs. They go to training camps now. Anytime you can spend more more time at your craft, you're going to be better. You're absolutely going to be better. So I think that there's an opportunity there, whether we call them full-time or not. I don't know if the term means anything.
What about having them call some of these spring games for other leagues?
Absolutely.
Honestly,
and we've had those conversations. What's
the holdup? Money?
I don't think there is.
Is it money?
I don't think there is. I think And that's always been, the NFL has more money than they know what to do with, right? So they have to put the resources in. I think spring football is an opportunity. We used to have NFL Europe where officials would go. So I think the new spring football league, right, the XFL, the USFL is merging. I'll be a part of that.
Okay.
I think there's an opportunity there to have, first or second year NFL officials work in that league, or maybe it's an official you're thinking about becoming a referee. I think there's an opportunity there.
That's Dean Blandino, the former head of officiating in the NFL. He's now an analyst for Fox, on with Rich Eisen yesterday on his show. A couple of things that he really pointed out there about the officiating. Number one, too much reliance on replay. Like the officials kind of wait for the play to finish up, and then they'll use replay to figure out if they got it right, and you got to reset the clock, and it's a lot of delay. And, fans get angry about that too. I do. I'm a fan. I get angry about that. The other part about full-time officials, this has been debated forever. And used to be, I don't know whether this is still the case, because you just heard Blandino say that an official may have a job on the side. Used to be these guys had like big-time jobs. They were lawyers. They were CEOs. And they would pack up on a Friday or a Saturday and fly out to where the game was, do the game, come home, and then resume their regular job on Monday. And these guys probably working 60, 70 hours a week at their job. There's only so much you can do in your life as you get older. How much time can you spend working? So now maybe they've settled it out a little bit, where a guy can have a secondary job. He can oversee things. And as he says, Blandino's saying they're spending 30, 40 hours a week watching film on games. I don't know how much good that does. I really don't. I don't even know about full-time officials, because what do they do in February and March and April? I mean, what is their role? How do they? Yeah, they can watch film. Look, Charlie Casserly was a mover and shaker behind bringing back instant replay. If you remember, instant replay started, I think, mid-'80s, like 86 or so. And the last year that they used it was 1992. So when the Redskins beat the Bills in the Super Bowl in 1992, so it'd be I guess even the 91 season. So 91 season and into the playoffs in 92, that was the last time it was used. And Art Monk, who never caught a touchdown pass in a Super Bowl, didn't catch one because he had one, but it was overruled by replay. And then we didn't have instant replay 92 through 1998. And we started to see some egregious calls, some calls that we saw on television replay that were not correct. And Charlie was really the mover and shaker behind this to get instant replay back. And that's when it came back with a challenge system, which we have now. And some say it takes too long. It was supposed to be 90 seconds tops. Sometimes it seems to go on for 4 or 5 minutes before they finally get things straightened out. And with HD TV, which really wasn't even around in 98, that didn't come in until like 4 or 5 years later. But now everybody's got a 65-inch HD TV. They can see everything in great detail, especially when they go to the replay and they stop it frame by frame, and you can see just, did his toe touch the white part before he went, was the ball moving when he went down? Everything is a Zapruder film now. And with what we have available, as Blandino points out, it's like the modern car where you have the rear view camera and things like that, and we drive differently. I guess we watch football differently. And I don't really know what the answer is, but Charlie's big point in bringing back instant replay was the game is too fast. A human being can't keep up with every play and get it right. So the more we talk about full-time officials and watching more film and, making sure they get it, I don't know if you're ever going to do it. And I'll bet if you looked at game tape from 30, 40 years ago, there were some horrendous calls that were made. There's one that, if you're an old-time Redskin fan, you will never forget, and this was 1975 when the Redskins played in St. Louis against the Cardinals, and I think his name was Mel Gray. Mel Gray dropped the touchdown pass in the end zone. I mean, it was clear he didn't have possession long enough. Pat Fisher knocked it out of his hands, and it was called a touchdown on the field. and it was an egregiously bad call, but there was no instant replay, no ability to overturn it. A lot of people think that cost them the game. It sent the game to overtime, and the Redskins eventually lost on a Jim Bakken field goal. But that was something we were screaming about 10 years, 11 years before instant replay finally hit the scene. There's a famous photo of Frank Herzog at Redskins Park back in the day showing George Allen, the coach of the team, that play. And that was the first time that Allen had gotten to see it. And the sick look on his face of, oh, my God, the officials really blew that. So we've been debating this for a long time. I think Freeman's right. I think it's just part of the fabric of what we do as sports fans, and it's part of what makes football popular, that people can kvetch about calls for days and days after it's over. But, whatever Blandino is talking about, having officials work more of these spring games, have them watch more film, I don't know if the debate is ever going to end. I think it's a human game played by human beings. I do not want to see instant replay removed. I know there are people who say, forget it, they can't get it right, let's just get rid of it. No, you have to have it as a backstop, but you have to use it more effectively too. And whether they actually get to that point or not, we'll have to see. But it's part of being an NFL watcher, that you watch the games and you go, they blew that call, they didn't get that right, instant replay didn't fix it, damn it. That's all part of what we do. Coming up next hour, what Alex Smith said about Tom Brady's comments and what others are saying about the two sides of the fence on that. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. Tony's coming up at 11 o'clock today. And in the next hour, we'll look further into what Alex Smith said as a pushback to what Tom Brady said. This was all going on last week as we were going into the holiday weekend, where Brady said, NFL, mediocre, right? And ironically, since the rules were changed for, Tom Brady, he complained about defensive players being called for roughing, and they can't touch the quarterback. And, it seemed hypocritical on his part, but a lot of people, oh, yeah, he's right. The NFL stinks. It stinks. It's not good anymore. And Alex Smith said, whoa, wait a minute. And so we'll look at both sides of that coming up in this hour. Also, it was 6 years ago today that Matt Lauer was fired. This was on the heels of Charlie Rose, who had been fired for sexual harassment in the workplace. And people who tuned into today's show on this day 6 years ago heard Savannah Guthrie say, yeah, Matt Lauer has been fired. We'll look back on that coming up this hour as well. A couple of things, a couple of good columns today on the Commanders situation. Tom Lavero, I guess, hasn't had a chance to weigh in on the Del Rio firing until today because of the holiday weekend. I think he writes once or twice a week in the Times, and he has been very, very critical of Jack Del Rio, especially going back to his comments about January 6th. And so I don't want to say he's dancing on the Del Rio grave here, but he wants it read into the record what Del Rio did while he was here in less than 4 seasons. And Tom writes today, Del Rio was the most Washington coach in the history of the team. Think about it. His tenure was historic. Has there ever been a Washington football coach fined for his political comments? A Washington coach in any sport, for that matter, fined for political comments. There is obviously some irony there. He says, could you imagine Richie Pettibone telling the world, I'm 100% for America, and if you're not, you can kiss my ass, as Del Rio once declared on Twitter? Pettibone's version might have been, babe, cool it. Yeah, I love Richie. Richie was great. He was here for the entire run of Joe Gibbs 1, then got an opportunity to be a coach and didn't work out. He was 4-12 and fired after 1 year, never coached again. More from Tom. He says, after an inconsistent 4 seasons on the job, including a disappointing 2023 season to date with a 4-8 record that's seen Del Rio's high-profile defense, 6 first-round picks, result in a bottom-feeding defense in nearly every measurable category, Del Rio, 60, a 2-time NFL coach in Jacksonville and Oakland, was fired by Commanders coach Ron Rivera. At least we're being led to believe it was his decision. Defensive backs coach Brent Wieselmeyer also let go. You heard Ron Rivera say on Friday that he was the one that called up Josh Harris on Friday morning and said it was time to get rid of Del Rio and Wieselmeyer. You can believe that if you want. I'm somewhat skeptical of it, but we'll take what Ron Rivera said on face value. More from Tom Libero. Firing Del Rio was the sacrifice that would be least disruptive for the rest of this sad season. Firing Rivera at this point would have opened up a larger set of problems more easily addressed once the season ends. But I'm guessing it may have really hurt Del Rio to be fired. After all, we're told he paid $100,000 to the team not to fire him in June of 2022 when he was doing his Tucker Carlson imitation. Del Rio was hired in January 2020, shortly after Rivera became Washington's coach, was politically active on Twitter, including when he tweeted about the January 6th riots at the Capitol. Would love to understand the whole story about why the summer of riots, looting, burning, and destruction of personal property is never discussed, but this is... #common sense. He defended those comments when he met with reporters and then opened up his brain for all to see when he called January 6th a dust-up, and that's what led to the $100,000 fine. He says, now that he's gone, we can assume he won't be getting back the $100,000 that he paid to keep his job. And I think when you look back on the era of Ron Rivera, which will come to an end either January 7th or January 8th after the Commanders play their last game against the Dallas Cowboys. I think Rivera, as his hiring of Del Rio, is also a big part of the picture here because they were very much linked. Remember when Rivera was going through his cancer treatments in year one, it was Del Rio who took over the active role as head coach. And at times the defense looked good, but as Tom points out in the column, they made a big investment in that defense. 6 first-round picks, and they traded away 2 of them. One of them, Montez Sweat, was here when he got here, but they traded him away for Bupkis. The number 2 pick of the draft, Chase Young, they got a 3rd-round pick for him. And, the defense, they had both of them this year, and it was so bad that they had to trade both of them at the trade deadline. So I thought that Tom reading that into the record, and that's really the great thing about newspapers is that these things stay around forever in archives. So whenever you go back and you research, it's kind of the black box of what happened during this era, and this is still spillover from the Dan Snyder era since he was the owner when both of them were hired. These kind of columns give you a little bit more insight into what happened. Also today, in the Washington Post, Candace Buckner goes in an interesting direction, talking to 3 of the longest-serving Commanders players. I'm not sure that there are any more that have been around longer than these 3. I don't think so. Certainly nobody longer than Tress Way, who's in his 10th year with the team. He came in with Jay Gruden in 2014. He's had 1 9-win season, and they've won 40% of the games while he's been here. That's not good. It's almost impossible to do, by the way, in the NFL because the way the league is set up, it's set up so you can get better, and you can get better fairly quickly. To have been here for 10 years and have only 1 9-win season and a winning percentage of 40%, not good. She also talks to Josh Allen, who is the longest of the Commanders, Jonathan Allen, who's been here since 2017, that's 7 years, and Terry McLaurin, who's been here since 2019, so that's 5 years. And she starts with Tress Way, and these are the quotes that he gives her on the misery of playing for this team. Well, he won't use that word, but the lack of success that they've had. He said, whenever the game is done, it is definitely a solid afternoon and evening of just a blank stare. You replay everything in your head. What in the world? And he says, but the next time you sit down to watch film and game plan for the next team, it's gone. It's like a visual trigger. I know that sounds crazy. You better do that or you're going to get left in the freaking dust. But that's what I would say makes it much easier to move on from that stuff. You're with the guys you love, doing what you love, and just when you want to do everything you can to win. Now, I had similar conversations with Darryl Green. This is going back 20 years, but great success for Darryl in his early days with Washington. He was in the Super Bowl in his first year. He won 2 more of them. They had some winning seasons, but I would say the last 10 years of his career were very much disappointing. And his last year in the league was Steve Spurrier's first, and they went 7-9. Kind of a miracle they went 7-9. But I would talk to him about what it must be like for somebody who experienced so much success and then to be a part of a team that is such a miserable state. And he said, inside those walls, we don't really feel that. You know, we're looking forward to each game. We're doing our job. We're not really focused on all the clouds that are going on outside the building. That was interesting. Here's what she gets from Terry McLaurin, who's having a rough year. You know, they're completing more passes than any team in the league, but they're spreading it around, and he's not really playing like a number one receiver, not getting, I shouldn't say not playing, but not getting the production that you would have. He's had 1,000-yard seasons here, but he's had to go through quarterback after quarterback after quarterback, 10 starting quarterbacks in 4.5 years. And he's 28 years old, and he now knows the highs and lows of the game. He did, like Jonathan Allen, sign a big second contract here, so he took the money to stay here. But she points out that McLaurin said something interesting ahead of the Dallas game. Losing sucks, especially when you lose back-to-back. But at the same time, nobody's going to feel sorry for where you're at in the season. You got to feel something for McLaurin, she writes, Allen and Way. Thank you, Way said with a smile, but I promise you we do not take a step back and look at all that. You know, they're moving ahead. They're not focusing on the recapping. That's what we do here, the Monday morning quarterbacking. Here's more from McLaurin, and he's a very insightful guy. He wins the Media Good Guy Award every year. He's cooperative. He talks. He's really a great person and a great football player, but he's stuck in this quicksand of a team. And here's what he says to Candace Buckner about his situation. I try to focus on what I can do better because I know I haven't been perfect this year. There's some opportunities that I've missed, and so I don't really focus a lot of time on what everybody else says is going on. It definitely is challenging, but when you haven't quite been on the winning side consistently, we're competitors, you know what I mean? But at the same time, you just have to continue to work your butt off and try to be part of the solution. Here's what he says. Obviously, you don't want to be a consistent loser, but at the same time, I don't think stuff like this will last forever. Again, he's 28 years old. He didn't come in the league at 20. He came in at 23. I wonder how many more good years he has left. And this looks like, especially based on what Josh Harris did with the Philadelphia 76ers, the process where they went through some long and miserable years to get to the point where they could have high draft picks. I don't know if football strategy is the same, but it may be possible that this team will be good after Terry McLaurin's done. I mean, what the chances of Terry McLaurin playing for a Super Bowl winner in Washington seem very remote at this point, especially with the direction that they're going. So it's really insightful to hear from these three guys who've been around for a long time. You know, Allen was actually asked at the trade deadline if he wanted out of here because he had this big, remember it was before the deadline, and he had that big expletive-filled thing where he just, you know, said, I'm sick of this S and dropped the F-bomb a bunch of times about losing it. It finally reached the boiling point on that, and he was asked a couple days later, do you want out of here? He says, no, this is where I grew up, and I want to finish my career here. So, you know, with all the misery that Tress Way has seen in 10 years, what Jonathan Allen has seen in 7 years, and Terry McLaurin in 5 years, they don't express it in that way when they talk to a reporter like Candace Buckner. So kind of interesting insight there. Now, let's get back to college football. No real surprise when the top four teams were announced last night. We're going to get the final on Sunday and find out which four teams are going to be playing for the national championship. But Georgia stays number 1. Michigan moves into the 2 spot ahead of Ohio State. Washington at 3. Florida State at 4. And then you got Oregon and Ohio State at 5 and 6, and Washington and Oregon are going to play, so they'll knock each other out that way. Florida State is probably going to win against Louisville in the ACC championship, but they've lost their starting quarterback for the year. Could the committee leave them out with an undefeated record? That's that. And could Ohio State jump up high enough? And how about Alabama at number 8, if they knock off Georgia in the SEC championship game, could they get themselves in the mix? And one of the points that Kirk Herbstreit was making last night on the College Football Reveal show was, we're not putting the best teams in. We may put the teams in with the best record and the highest rankings, but the average margin of victory in the semifinal games is 19 points. And last year we had a travesty of a national championship game where Georgia just blew the doors off of TCU, and they had a losing record this year. So I don't know, what'll happen when they have the final vote. But, man, if Florida State beats Louisville and they get left out with a 13-0 record, and you're going to be putting in maybe a one-loss team in Alabama and possibly a one-loss team in Oregon or maybe even Ohio State or even Texas, how's that going to sit? I don't know. More college football. David Pollock, who was a great analyst on ESPN, now I guess looking for work, but showing up on the Dan Patrick Show the other day and talking about what college football is going to look like moving forward, because all this conference realignment starts next year. The Pac-12 essentially goes away, and what concerns he has with college football moving forward, and then they segue into the Heisman Trophy conversation.
We've already lost the rivalries; those are gone. The travel across the country, like, it's going to be strange, man, and you obviously kill most of the budgets of a lot of other teams in the offseason. They're going to have to be inconvenienced the most. Football won't be inconvenienced as much, but I think just losing the luster that was college football, losing the traditions, losing the passion, some of that stuff, man, I know it's like the old guy talking probably, and I love watching this, I love watching that, but a lot of those things are going to be gone. A lot of those rivalries are going to be gone. A lot of those coaching staff and those teams, like a team like Washington State who almost beat Washington, like, where do they go? Do they fall off the map now? Oregon State, their coach now goes to Michigan State, obviously. Like, do they fall off the map? Like, it stinks for those type of programs that we've seen some history and we've seen some cool things from. And those things, where do they go now?
Who gets your Heisman vote?
Jaden Daniels. I mean, listen, people are going to come at me, I know, for the 3 losses. But, dude, if you watch college football every weekend, I have a standing tweet every Saturday. Jaden Daniels is the best player in college football. Jaden Daniels is the best player in college football. He's got 90 plays of 20-plus yards or more. You know what the next closest is, Dan? 61. 61. Like, he's a human highlight film. He can't control that his defense is stuck, but, man, over 1,100 yards rushing, over 50 touchdowns. And if you want to talk about over 50 touchdowns, that's Cam Newton. That's Joe Burrow. That's Tebow. That's that type of, numbers that he's put up this year. He's the best player I've seen. I'm so interested to see him go to the next level because he's got some Lamar to him, some of that shake and that slight build, but throws the football a lot better, especially at this point in his career. But, man, he's to me, every week I turn on the television and I watch, he's the best player.
And then you got probably the 2 favorites. They're both transfers with, Daniels and Bo Nix.
Yeah, and Bo Nix is really, really good. And how about that story, Dan? Like, Bo Nix comes in as a freshman, to Auburn, his dad's alma mater, beats Oregon, and then the sizzle comes off and the program leaves, and then he goes and rebuilds himself. And I'll tell you this, too. I think Bo Nix is a first-round pick. Like, that's how much his story has been turned around of being left for gone, and now leads the nation in completion percentage, passing yards, like doing a great job carrying Oregon. And he's a great player, but watching him and Jaden Daniels, the rushing component, the explosive play component, man, that's to me the separator.
But I wonder, though, this weekend with Oregon and Washington, and if Bo Nix has a big game, this is, everybody has to have a standalone game, and he would have another opportunity for a standalone game where Daniels would not.
100%. And listen, the voters in the past, they want you to be on a national championship contender. And so I think you got Penix and Nix both still alive. The Washington quarterback, his best game, one of his best games was against Oregon. He goes and lights up Oregon again. I think people are going to be like, wait a minute, you got to be on a championship team, which I don't agree with, by the way. That doesn't make you the best player because you have the best team around you. I don't agree with that at all. I never have. And the way I vote isn't that way. But Bo Nix has an opportunity, a stage, avenge a loss. After last week, too, against Oregon State, you've been a really good ranked opponent. Dan, that's the best he's looked. They were explosive. It wasn't dink and dunk. Like, he was taking shots. It was him making big-time plays. You do it again against Washington with everybody watching, you could go get that thing.
That's David Pollock on the Heisman Trophy race and what college football is going to look like. Yeah, he's right. I mean, very unusual for a player on a 3-loss team like Jaden Daniels is with LSU to get the Heisman Trophy, but it could happen this year. The numbers are overwhelming, and we went into a season where it looked like we might have a repeat winner in Caleb Williams, and the way that the USC season cratered, it kind of spread out all the Heisman talk to a variety of people. So I bet this is going to be one of the closest votes they've ever had, because there really doesn't seem to be a strong front runner at this point. A lot of guys are worthy, and Jaden Daniels, as Pollock outlines there, certainly worthy of getting it. But because voters vote usually like on signature plays, the Desmond Howard cemented the Heisman when he scored a touchdown in the Michigan game and did the Heisman pose. That sealed it for him. And, sometimes Tim Brown, actually early in the season, this was 87 when he was playing for Notre Dame, had a big punt return in a national TV game against Michigan, and people began to take notice of him in a big way that year, and he won the Heisman. So, it just depends, but it's become pretty much a quarterback award. Occasionally a wide receiver will win it. I think most people who watch college football say Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best player in college football, but it generally goes to a quarterback, and it's probably going to be one of the few that Pollock discussed there.